Hi. Okay. Thank you so much, Dr. Hornsby. I'm excited to talk to you guys about how to best manage remote teams during this time. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So teams in a remote environment, I'd love to hear to what extent your organization's operating remotely. A few things I want to talk about in terms of teams in a remote environment. I think when we're busy with all of that, what's happening with this COVID-19 stuff, it's easy to let culture go by the wayside. And I think a lot of organizations either feel like their culture is suffering or that their culture becomes non-existent when they move into a remote environment. But I think if we are crystal clear with what we expect out of people and keep expectations really clear, then I think it's easy to add in those other component parts that make sure that we actually have a culture. But I don't think a culture can really exist if people are wondering what to do in their jobs, if they're feeling super micromanaged, if they're not feeling trusted, if they're not talking to their team as much. And so I'm hoping to give you guys some ideas for how to make a lot of those things that just might be more simple in an office environment, autopilot on a remote team, and then build in those extra layers of team building experiences. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is Netiquette. And I think that this is something that you guys can use as a team building experience to talk to your team about, now that we're in this remote world, how do we interact in this online environment? I think it can be really challenging to know what are the rules for play. And so the Netiquette, so etiquette with net, is how to interact in an online environment. It reinforces the organizational culture if implemented effectively. I think with most things, if you have great operations in your business, it can be additive to the culture. I think that's something that has always really interested me is if we have really tight operations, then we can have the room in our brains for the fun stuff, like the relationship building stuff. And I think that having input from a lot of people can make building a netiquette for your team just a great part of your culture. And so a netiquette, think of it as like a team charter, so sort of a way of saying this is what we expect out of one another. And we're going to make that really clear and set it up in a way that's really in line with the cultural values. So an etiquette item could be because we value each other's time and contribution. So those words are chosen really carefully. Because we value each other's time and contribution, we respond to one another in internal emails within 24 hours. We do not BCC, or maybe you guys don't mind BCCing, but sometimes it can be problematic. Although I'm sure Gary will tell you that sometimes he has used it as a way to get HR involved in a passive way. We always or we never CC. Sometimes we're getting so many emails from people that we're CC'd on and we're like, can the madness stop? My inbox is out of control. We have our cameras on in these meetings, or we don't have our cameras on in these meetings. It's optional or it's not. We keep meetings to 30 or 60 minutes. When I worked for an organization called Techstars, we had our meetings set to either 20 or 50 minutes. And that was so that we had a 10-minute buffer to prepare for our next set of meetings, because when you're in a virtual environment, you just find that you're on Zoom a lot. And so just having that buffer time was really important. We remember that tone in email may come across differently in person, and we always assume good intent. I love that one, and I would hope that that's in most of yours. It's a way of just saying, we expect the best out of everyone. And you might have in there, what hours are we available to be responsive? Are we responsive until 5 p.m.? Are we responsive 24/7? What's the norm? It's up to you guys to decide. So these are just some examples, but of course you guys can build out your netiquette rules however you like. And there's some great resources online about things like how to build a team charter and get everyone involved so everyone's voice is heard. So I would just use something like that, and this could be like a couple hours workshop with your team. Another thing that I think is really important in a team is having knowledge management really tight, because when we're working in teams remotely, I might be doing my own thing on my own computer and I might not be sharing it as well. And when we're in person, it's so easy to say, hey, Bob, I don't know where that file is. Can you give it to me? And it can be more challenging when we're not seeing people. And so I think to manage a good team well, I think it is important to have some really great knowledge management worked out. And so I have here that knowledge management hygiene is an important in an online environment, and that can be part of your Netiquette guide. And so develop those guidelines, decide on which sort of internal drive you're going to use. I like Box and G Suite. I think that both of them have great security tools. And I especially like G Suite tools because you're able to say open a document or open a spreadsheet and be live editing together. And I think that can make it more collaborative as well. So think about that, carefully explore your options, and then just make it clear to your team what you expect. Video calling. So sort of in this whole vein of the Netiquette, like I said, you want to have things set up for your team, the expectations. Do we have our videos on? Does it make it more connective? If we do we have virtual backgrounds? Do we have security settings? Which tool are we going to use? Zoom seems to be the popular one these days. But again, to have a really strong team, I think to have these things really explicit can be really helpful. Some tips on security just to get your guys' systems in check, but you can do your own research. And probably my favorite tool for being a great online team is Slack. And some of you probably use Slack already. Some of you may have heard of it. And hopefully I'm reaching out to some of you guys here who have never heard of it. Slack is a really cool tool. And just to think, just in terms of entrepreneurship, it's really cool. It was originally used as a system for video gamers to connect and be able to share their tips on how they were working through a game. And then the founders realized they weren't making any money that way, and they turned it into an enterprise software and realized that there wasn't anything like it on the market for companies. And so think of it as instant messaging meets collaborating on any of your, documents and projects, to having a place to have water cooler conversations with employees. It's a way to reduce your email usage. It's a way to simply check in and hear from everyone. One aspect I like of it is you can have Slack send a quick note to everybody in your team at a certain time every day, like 8 a.m. and say, what are you working on today? What did you do yesterday? Any quick updates. So you can do a stand-up meeting. And it can also help you facilitate things like virtual coffees. So it's kind of a robot where it'll say, Sally and Jim have never met. Let's set them up for a virtual coffee this month. They'll have 30 minutes to have a phone call sometime. And so that internal networking keeps happening. But I'm going to show you a video that I hope gives you a little bit of a more illustrative view of what to expect with Slack. So here we go.
Welcome to Slack. Slack is a new kind of messaging for teams, bringing all your communication together in one simple place and integrating with the tools you already use. What's different about Slack is that team conversations are organized into channels. You can create channels for departments, projects, office locations, anything you like. Public channels are open, so anyone on your team can pop in to see what's going on and join the conversation. Nice. Great job, everyone. It's not just about messaging, though. You can also share files, images, PDFs, documents, spreadsheets. Look, I've got them right here. You just simply drag and drop them into the right channel, like that. You and your colleagues can add comments along with the document, making collaboration more contextual, transparent, and efficient. If you have a project that's confidential, you can create a private channel. Only the people you invite to the channel will be able to join. And if you need to reach someone directly, you can send them a direct message. It's totally private and secure. You can also send a message to a group of people. It's a great way to communicate with your teammates in a short-term, lightweight sort of way. Oh, this should be good. By the way, if you're offline in another application or just doing research, Slack can notify you when an item needs your attention. Let me get right on this. Everything you post on Slack is searchable. Messages, notifications, files, even the content within those files. Oh, see, there it is. Now, about those integrations I mentioned earlier. Well, with Slack, you can plug in many of the tools and services you already use and have notifications from those systems appear in whatever channels you choose. Oh, thanks, I think. Best of all, Slack works the way you work. So if you're on the go, you can start a conversation on your desktop and pick it up on our mobile device. Everything's in sync. More productive, more transparent, more efficient, and no more email. That's Slack.
Great. So I think Slack is something that you guys should be using, whether you're in person again or whether you're online. I think it's just such a great tool. And I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but for 3 years, I worked at a company called Techstars that was set up to be fully remote. And so the idea was we had 200 employees and we were literally all over the world. There was us, and we had people in Singapore, a couple of us in Kansas City, a couple of us in New York, kind of all over the place. Most people worked in Boulder. And one thing that I always appreciated was, 50 employees worked in Boulder. Instead of saying that the home office was in Boulder or that it was based in Boulder, even that really big office, they said, we're all remote workers, including the Boulder office. And so we all felt like we were at a level playing field because we all needed to be in all these different locations. And so the way that people communicated and used language around where we were location-wise made a big difference.